Well, hello traders and investors. I'm L.A. Little, and this is your daily NeoTA wrap where we take a look at these markets. We do it from a neoclassical perspective. What does that mean? That means we look at what happened today and we ask ourselves, does it tell us anything about the coming ones? Do a show 4 times a week, every Monday through Thursday. It's broadcast at before 10 o'clock Eastern Time. It's archived on YouTube, and it's on our channel, L.A. Little. If you want to get notifications anytime I push content that's public, just reach up in the right-hand corner and hit the subscribe button. As far as what happened today, pretty red day over in Europe. You see the numbers there, both. Let me find them for you here. The DAX, the CACs, all of those were down. Belgium, so forth. We had some good action in Asia again last night, or actually tonight. It looks like with the Nikkei, it was up last night. Actually, it was down last night. It's up tonight. The Shanghai market has been up pretty good, getting a little bit of a pullback. So you're getting a little pullback there. But in general, Asia hasn't done too bad with a strong dollar. That's been helping China. If we look at the, I don't know if the dollar is helping China, but China's been on a roll lately. I should probably correct that. If we look at Europe, though, some pressure. If we look at our markets, most importantly, mixed markets at best. Had a little bit of gain on the S&P and on the Dow, but you actually lost it on the Nasdaq and Russell. And I want to talk about that a little bit more as we get into the show. Let's take a look at the charts. Let's start with the dollar, because the dollar is the story right now. So the dollar does extend, does a doji at these highs. I wouldn't be surprised to see it try to come back. But right now, if I look elsewhere, I don't see what's going to cause it to come back. For example, if I go to the euro, I don't see the euro dissipating on that downside. Matter of fact, the euro just picked it up where the pound left off. Euro's driving down here to test the lows. And all the volumes are down here. It's already into this big bar, which is the high volume low. So Europe, to me, looks like it continues to give the dollar some strength. And if you look at the Japanese yen, that one's been pushing lower, breaks a swing point low tonight. If we look at it on the weekly, starting to come down. Remember, we're up here testing, and let me pull over the monthly chart. One of the big questions is, would this thing break out, or would it regenerate to the downside? Well, it looks like it's trying to regenerate to the downside. That's good. It's just that the bad thing is that you got everything else falling out of bed, making the dollar pretty strong. Not only against the yen, but against everything. And that's putting a little bit of a crimp into these markets, and that's what's been chewing at them lately. Let's look at the indexes. So let me find the general markets here and pop into the S&P. And so what we have is some very weak, labored bounces today. Dojis on most of them, so you got tails on the top, tails on the bottom. Don't know where they're going, right? A little bit of a bounce. Inside day really doesn't tell you much of anything. If you look at the Nasdaq, you have the same thing. The Nasdaq does not quite test the bottom, has light volume on the bounce. Look at the NDX. You have the same thing, light volume, a little bit of a bounce. All of them were dojis today, and that says that this market doesn't know what to do next. If you look at the calendar, you got all the big bank stocks going to give you earnings. That's probably going to be what propels this up or down. And let's talk about that a little bit more by moving to the sectors. And so I'm going to pop over and I'm going to show you what's happening on the sectors. And we're going to start with technology, because technology has been what's been driving this thing up. But it came off hard, broke, and let's draw in some of these things as we go. So it broke down on the bullish retest regenerate. And what we're talking about is the prior swing point high. Got underneath it today, tried to get back into it. That does look like it's going to try and trade lower. Now, technology has been what's been driving this market up. And it's not just XLK, but it's the group. It's this. It's the SOX. So let's pull the SOX up. SOX itself got up here, and I told you, that evening, I believe we talked about it, and I said it looks pretty tired, looks like it's going to roll. It does roll, rolls pretty fast, which is normal with the SOX, just like you saw back here. Today, it actually gets under back over less volume, and it's a hammer reversal. So what that says is this thing's going to go back up. If you look at where it's going to try to get back into, You only look at these two bars here, and we're talking about these two big volume bars. If you draw a line across there, you see that red line that I had there. That's where it's going to try to bounce to. And then we're going to see whether it's actually going to get another leg up or not and get some sort of a failed bounce, right, that leads it lower. That's going to be the big question. SOX has been driving this market, is going to help a little bit more probably on some sort of a bounce attempt. But if you look elsewhere, you're not getting the help at all, and in particular, it's biotech, right? So biotech had a big bar, range traded that bar. Once it got back up into it, went to the top of it, back down to it, tried to bounce, and then gave it up, right? That's extended on the downside. You could get a bounce off of it, but the problem here is that this thing now has failed on its bullish retest regen on the weekly. That says there's probably more pain to come. That's not a good thing because this is also a major factor. The other major factor is the big three, Apple, Intel, Microsoft. Those guys are still doing well, and I'm not going to pull all of them up, but those are still holding. So SOX are probably going to get a bounce. The big three still holding. Biotech, even though it could get a bounce here at some point, it looks like it probably comes from lower, not higher. And so technology, from what I can see, is not going to be what drives this market. You're going to have to hand it off. It's going to have to be somebody else. Enter the banking sector, right? The banking sector is the one that's going to have to step up and do something to the top side. And if you draw in the ABCD structure, you've actually got it here, and you've got earnings coming up, as I just said. This is the sector that could move this market back to the top side, right? And it's all going to depend on what JP Morgan, Citigroup, Bank of America, Wells Fargo probably gets a bounce tonight. They finally got a resignation out of the embattled CEO there that has been grilled, shall we say, for the last couple weeks at least, probably a good month now. This could be the sector that's the sleeper that takes over. It's a heavily weighted sector, and if this sector can actually push back to the top side, and as you see here on the weekly, it's just coming back in to do a bullish retest regenerate. Now, what typically happens when you do this is you get a full retest regen, and that is what it got, right to that area there, full retest. It tried to regenerate, in other words, it started popping out of there. It's weekly coming back in, but if this turns and runs, gets over this and gets the juice to get over this swing point high, then you got something going again. And if in fact that takes place, you know, you've got some ABCD structures that are rather large here that could propel this a pretty good distance. And so, you know, my ideal here is that if you're going to get juice to the top side, financial sector is the one to look at, mainly because it's set up properly and you got news coming into it, and it's a large weighted sector. Something has to step up if this bull market's going to continue. The one thing I do see continuing day after day, night after night, is one call after another, and on about how this market's going to crash. Folks, the market's not going to crash, at least not at this point. If it's going to crash, that's going to come later. That's my opinion. You can write it down if you want. We can revisit it a month from now. If we get a crash, it's going to come after bounces. Failed bounces are what leads to crashes almost always. And those failed bounces, if you're going to get some sort of a crash, have to line up properly. And right now, they're simply not doing that. And what I'm talking about is if I pull the S&P back up, and let's get it back up here and look at it, this is a setup to test these lows again potentially, right? And the way you stop that is you get back over what was important on the way up, on the way down, and that's this bar. And I expect that's the demarcating line now. You got close to it today, not quite to it. I wouldn't be surprised to see it try to get into it tomorrow. If that fails, then we're going to set up a potential ABCD structure to the downside that could break these lows. Doesn't mean it will, but it could. Where could it take us? About 2085. Okay, so now let's look at the weekly chart. And I didn't mean to jump to the monthly. Let's get the weekly back up. Where's 2085 on the weekly? Well, if you draw in your retest regenerate zones, 2085 is still in those zones on the way back. Now that would be deeper than you want to see it travel, and so that's why I said it doesn't mean it necessarily will break. It would also be an ABCD structure to the downside on the weekly, and where would that measure? That would measure about the same price point. And so 2085 potentially becomes the target if this market can't rally. And if it's going to rally, in my opinion, it's going to be the financials that do it. Tomorrow, looks like you have a small chance for more testing to the upside, but I don't see enough broad support to make this market push up more than that area that we just talked about. And let me bring it back up here before I call it a night. And that price point is 2146. That's where I think you're going to try to test to tomorrow. And unless something magical happens, probably going to hang there or fell, one of the two, and leave it up to the financials on Friday to do their thing. That's it for tonight. Have a great one. I'll see you next time. Good night.